For first-year mine boss Kevin Beets, it's a monumental day. After months of breakdowns and delays, Kevin's finally ready to fire up his wash plant and catch the first gold.
Kevin Beets bet everything, his life savings, on a propane generator, believing it would turn the season around. But just when things started looking up, disaster struck, threatening to wipe out everything. The trommel, their last hope, stood unfinished, and without it, Paradise Hill was doomed. Tune in to see how his gamble plays out and the shocking disaster waiting to unfold. Danger at Indian River. The mining season couldn't have started off any worse. Over at the Indian River, Tony and his crew poured millions into the operation, hoping for a big break. But before they could even catch their breath, disaster struck. The whole setup was barely running when things went south, and just like that, the crew was forced to pack up and return to Paradise Hill. But what they found waiting for them at Paradise Hill would change everything. Time kept moving, and so did the expenses. But profits, nowhere to be seen. Tony had his sights set on getting Paradise Hill back up and running, banking everything on his last hope, the towering 40-foot-long trommel. If he couldn't get this massive machine spinning, his whole season was toast. But there was a catch. The thing wasn't even put together yet, and time was running out. The deadline was creeping up fast. By the end of the week, the trommel had to be turning, separating pay dirt from gold. If not, the family business would be in serious trouble. Every second counted, every move mattered, and there was zero room for mistakes. Tony's frustration was clear. The operation wasn't moving fast enough, and with every passing hour, it felt like they were losing ground. Paradise Hill, a name that sounded sweet but felt like a cruel joke. Standing at the top, looking down at the battered site, it was obvious how much had changed. Or maybe how much had been left undone. With Kevin and Faith gone for most of the season, the cracks in the operation were showing. Had the crew truly realized how much Kevin had handled before stepping away? At the beginning of the season, Kevin, Tony's eldest son, and his partner Faith made a bold decision. They were taking time off. That meant Tony had to face the chaos without his right-hand man. And let's just say, it wasn't smooth sailing. For months, he wrestled with assembling the trommel, trying to make things work without Kevin's expertise. It was slow, painful, and getting more frustrating by the day. Then, just when things were reaching a breaking point, Monica, Tony's daughter, stepped in. She had seen enough. The operation was struggling, and there was only one thing to do: call in backup. And who better than the guy who knew the place like the back of his hand? The message was simple. It was time for Kevin to come back. And just like that, Kevin returned to Paradise Hill. But stepping back onto the site, it was clear this wasn't going to be easy. The trommel was close to completion, but close wasn't good enough. Standing right in front of it, the flaws became obvious. Things weren't lining up, parts were off, and Kevin knew right away. This wasn't a one-day fix. Kevin took a deep breath, taking in the mess before him. The trommel's gear was sitting too high. Adjustments were needed, and there was still the final assembly to deal with. The team had worked hard, no doubt, but it wasn't finished. Not yet. There was pressure, a lot of it. If this thing didn't start running within a week, all eyes would be on Kevin. He had to get this done, and fast. But things had a way of going sideways, especially in mining. Equipment failed, parts broke, weather turned nasty. Nothing was ever predictable. But one thing was certain: failure wasn't an option. Kevin rolled up his sleeves, ready to tackle the beast. This was his moment, his chance to prove that stepping away didn't mean he was out of the game. The clock was ticking, the stakes were sky high, and it was all on him to turn things around. The fate of Paradise Hill rested in his hands, and he wasn't about to let it slip through his fingers. Kevin took charge immediately. His eyes scanned the equipment, every bolt and weld, making quick mental notes of what needed fixing. The crew gathered around, waiting. There was a lot of work ahead, but first Kevin needed to get a real understanding of just how deep the problems ran. Looking closer at the trommel, it was obvious why it wasn't ready. The gear alignment was off, the motor mounts weren't secured properly, and the water system that washed the pay dirt was only half installed. If this machine wasn't put together perfectly, it wouldn't separate gold from rocks efficiently. That meant wasted time, wasted pay dirt, and a whole lot of lost money. Kevin started directing the crew. Everyone had their task: Bolts needed tightening, pipes needed securing, and the whole frame of the trommel had to be reinforced before they could even think about running material through it. Kevin wasn't about to let another breakdown set them back even further. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky, but Kevin barely noticed. The noise of wrenches clanking against metal, the sound of heavy machinery rumbling in the background, the occasional shout from a worker. This was the kind of work he knew best. The kind of work that built the Beets family mining empire. Tony was watching from a distance. He knew bringing Kevin back was the right call, but he also knew that their relationship wasn't the easiest. They had their differences. Strong-willed, stubborn, both determined to do things their way. But at the end of the day, they were family, and family stuck together. Day turned to night. The floodlights cast long shadows over the site, illuminating the skeleton of the trommel as it slowly started to take shape. Kevin and the crew didn't stop. The deadline wasn't moving and there was no room for delays. By the third day, the trommel was nearly ready. The main drum was finally secured, the motor properly aligned, and the conveyor belts installed. Kevin double-checked every part, making sure nothing was loose. The smallest mistake could mean disaster, and disaster wasn't an option. Then came the real test. Would it actually run? The crew gathered around as Kevin signaled to start the machine. The motors hummed, the gears turned, and the trommel slowly began to rotate. Dirt tumbled inside, the water jets sprayed, and for the first time in a long time, things were looking good. As the trommel starts, the crew at Paradise Hill gets ready for more challenges. Paradise Hill's high-stakes return. The moment was huge. This was what they had been fighting for. But Kevin knew better than to celebrate too early. The trommel was running, but it had to keep running. One breakdown, one faulty part, and everything could go downhill fast. The next few days were all about fine-tuning. Kevin and the crew monitored every part of the process, adjusting as needed. Pay dirt was finally moving through the system. Gold was being recovered. And just like that, Paradise Hill was back in business. Tony stood beside Kevin watching the trommel work. No words were needed. The job was done. The fight wasn't over. Mining was always a gamble, but at least for now, they were back in the game. And with Kevin leading the charge, the Beets family had a real shot at turning this season around. Kevin Beets is back, and the gold mining season just got a whole lot more interesting. Paradise Hill has seen its fair share of struggles, and with Tony Beets running the show, things are never exactly smooth sailing. Tony's always been a man who likes to have his hands on every little detail, but even he can't deny that Kevin's return is a big deal. After a summer away, Kevin's back in the dirt, ready to get things moving. But stepping onto the site, he can't help but notice things aren't as far along as they should be. Nearly 10 months have passed, and yet the trommel has been sitting idle. Frustration bubbles up, but there's no time to dwell. There's work to do, and a lot of it. Tony and Mike have already made some progress. The old broken drive ring has been swapped out, and the wash plant has been moved to a fresh pad. But now the real work begins. Kevin and his crew need to haul in the sluice deck, attach it to the trommel, set up the distribution box, and connect the water supply. That's just the start. A conveyor needs to be brought in, and the hopper feeder has to be installed. And Tony, he wants it all done by the end of the week. As Kevin sizes up the job ahead, he can't help but notice he's not the only one who's changed over the summer. Little Beets has put on some weight, not exactly the lean, mean mining machine he once was. Looks like they'll both be working off a bit of extra baggage. First up, the sluice deck. Getting it in place is no small feat. The machine grumbles as they maneuver it forward inch by inch, carefully lining it up. Every movement has to be precise, and there's no room for error. But after some back and forth adjustments, the deck finally settles into place. Next, the conveyor. This is what feeds the pay dirt into the trommel, and without it, the whole operation is at a standstill. Kevin's got the excavator on one end and the crane on the other. Lifting, shifting, and angling it just right, it's all about coordination. It's slow, steady work, but it has to be done perfectly. Lining up the bolts is a challenge in itself. Everything needs to be exact, down to the last fraction of an inch. One wrong move, and they're back to square one. Kevin squints at the setup. The conveyor isn't quite lining up the way it should. Adjustments are made. Still not right. Another shift, a deep breath. But there's no time to celebrate. The clock is ticking and Tony's not a patient man. Next on the list is the hopper feeder. This beast of a machine is responsible for making sure everything flows smoothly into the trommel. It's heavy, it's awkward, and getting it into position is going to take every bit of skill the crew has. Kevin knows the stakes. If this setup isn't done right, they won't be washing any gold, and that's not an option. The days are long, the work is grueling, and every muscle in his body is screaming, but giving up isn't in the Beets' blood. With sweat dripping and dirt clinging to every inch of him, Kevin steps back, eyes scanning over the setup. It's been a tough start, but they're making progress. The trommel is almost ready to run, and soon pay dirt will be flowing. Tony might be breathing down their necks, but Kevin knows one thing for sure. Paradise Hill isn't going down without a fight, and neither is he. Hours stretch into days, and the work never seems to end. The team hauls heavy equipment through the mud, straining against the weight of every piece. The sluice deck needs reinforcing, the water supply lines have to be double-checked, and every single bolt must be torqued just right. A mistake here doesn't mean a simple fix, it could mean the entire operation grinds to a halt. The air is thick with the scent of oil and sweat, the constant hum of machinery filling every moment. Kevin barely stops to catch his breath, mind racing through each next step. The conveyor still needs some fine-tuning, and the sluice deck alignment has to be perfect. A slight miscalculation could send gold-laden dirt spilling over the sides, wasting precious material. That's not an option. Despite the exhaustion, there's a fire in Kevin's gut. The drive to get it done, to prove that he can pull this off. Tony has his doubts, always watching, always critiquing. Kevin shrugs it off. He's not here for praise. He's here to make sure this mine produces. A sudden jolt from the conveyor catches his attention. Something's not right. He signals for the team to hold off as he moves in closer, inspecting the setup. A bolt looks loose. Too loose. That could be a disaster waiting to happen. Grabbing a wrench, he tightens it down, double-checking each connection. It's small details like these that separate success from failure. By the time the sun dips below the horizon, Kevin's covered in grime, boots caked in mud. The crew is just as battered, but there's a sense of satisfaction in the air. Piece by piece, they're getting there. The trommel is closer to running than it's been in months. There's still work to do, but the momentum is building. With the trommel running, new problems arise that test the crew's resolve. The race against ruin. Another day, another challenge. The final water connections need securing, and the distribution box must be fitted with exact precision. Kevin takes a step back, rolling out his shoulders, feeling every hour of labor in his bones. But he wouldn't have it any other way. Kevin Beets was back at Paradise Hill, and things were a mess. Tony's mining operation was barely holding together, and if something didn't change fast, it was all going to come crashing down. The big problem? The conveyor system, a beast of a machine responsible for moving massive amounts of dirt, was all out of whack. It was supposed to handle 350 yards of dirt every hour, but the support beams were bent, throwing everything off. If Kevin didn't fix it, there'd be no gold, and no gold meant no money. Kevin knew what had to be done. The struts were a disaster. They didn't line up, which meant the whole conveyor was useless. To get things back in shape, he had to cut the struts free from the crossbeams, pull everything back into place, and then weld it all together again, locking the structure in tight. Easier said than done, especially with the heat blasting down like an oven set to max. Sweat dripped down his back as he fired up the tools. The metal sizzled, sparks flying everywhere. It was scorching, and every move had to be precise. One wrong cut, one bad weld, and the whole thing could get even worse. But Kevin wasn't about to let that happen. This wasn't his first time dealing with a mess like this. The heat made it almost unbearable. The metal was so hot that every time he touched something, it felt like his skin might just melt off. He pushed through, grinding, cutting, pulling, doing everything to force the twisted metal back where it needed to be. The day dragged on, each second feeling longer than the last, but giving up wasn't an option. After what felt like forever, the beams started to line up. Bit by bit, Kevin forced the conveyor back into place, securing each piece before hitting it with the final welds. The smell of burning metal filled the air, mixing with the dirt and sweat, but he barely noticed. He was too focused, too deep in the work. One last check, one last spark, and it was done. Stepping back, he wiped his forehead, staring at the conveyor. It wasn't pretty, but it was solid. He tested it out and the massive machine roared back to life, moving dirt just like it was supposed to. The job was done, the mine was back in action, and for now, Paradise Hill was safe from disaster. Kevin had pulled it off again, proving once more why he was the guy Tony could count on when things went south. But this was just another day at the mine, and tomorrow, who knew what fresh chaos would be waiting? The mining world never stopped, and neither did the problems. It wasn't just about fixing one machine, everything on that site needed constant attention. Equipment took a beating, the ground shifted, weather played tricks, and nothing ever stayed easy for long. Kevin had learned that early on. It wasn't just about knowing how to fix things, it was about keeping everything running while the pressure mounted. Every minute counted, and every mistake could mean thousands of dollars lost. He took a moment to look around. The crew was busy, each person locked into their own battle with the relentless work. The heat was punishing, but there was no time to rest. The next breakdown could happen any second. Kevin moved to check on the wash plant, another crucial piece of the operation. If the conveyor was the heart pumping dirt, the wash plant was the brain figuring out what was worth keeping. And right now, something wasn't right. A deep grinding noise echoed from the machine, the kind of sound that spelled trouble. The bearings were worn down, and if they gave out completely, everything would seize up. Kevin grabbed his tools again. No time to waste. He pulled apart the housing, exposing the damaged components. The worn-down metal looked rough, and replacing it wouldn't be quick, but the plant couldn't run like this. He called for some grease and fresh parts. The team worked fast, hands covered in grime, focused on keeping the gold flowing. This was mining. Long hours, brutal conditions, constant breakdowns, but at the end of the day, it was all about the gold. Every repair, every adjustment, every fix led back to one thing: keeping the pay dirt moving and making sure the operation didn't come to a grinding halt. Kevin had grown up in this world, learned from the best, and there was no turning back now. The work was hard, but there was nothing else he'd rather be doing. The sun hung low, casting long shadows over Paradise Hill. The machines rumbled on, carrying dirt, separating gold, keeping the dream alive. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more breakdowns, more fixes. Kevin took a breath, wiped the grease from his hands, and prepared for whatever was coming next. Because in the world of gold mining, the work never ended. How much of this season's chaos could have been avoided if Kevin had never left? Did his absence make things worse, or was it exactly what the team needed to step up? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more.